This is a relatively novel concept, really like in the last 15 plus years, that this has really come out in science and research. And we have seen a lot of promising things that have shown the benefits of nutrition and diet plays on our overall health, specifically in our gut. So our gut, if you're not already familiar, is this kind of interconnected amount of organs that exist from our mouth down south. And we have all kinds of different functionalities that occur. And the gut in particular has specific functions that helps us, or it could potentially go the other direction if we don't treat it right. So really what I'm going to try to do is encourage you to focus on, dietary practices that can help manage some of those symptoms, as well as really help you kind of try to thrive and flourish a little bit as you're going through this. Next slide, please. If we're talking about gut health, we have to talk about some of the potential symptoms that are associated with people who suffer through scleroderma. We know there's a lot of manifestations that can occur in different organs around the body. Certainly affects the lungs, certainly affects the kidneys, the heart, even the brain. Definitely, obviously, the skin manifestations and Raynaud syndromes. There's many, many different effects that can occur. What I really want to try to drive home the message is with the symptoms that are associated with the gastrointestinal tract. So please make sure that when you're looking at these things, you're paying attention to things that might be something that is part of your life, but also might be part of things that you might deal with on a daily basis and other people as well, because this is a support system to really try to help each and every one of us. And if there's anything that I can provide here, that's what I want to do is I want to help and guide and provide any type of information that might be beneficial to you. Next slide, please. The gut microbiome. This is a community. This is a channel, a population of all different types of microorganisms that exist in our gut. In fact, this is part of what we call the gut-brain axis. The gut-brain axis is this pathway. It's a channel and a network of all different types of nerves, as well as different hormonal factors, that there's interconnected communication that happens between the brain as well as the gastrointestinal tract. And this is really, really important because of the impact and the effect that the gut microbiome has on our overall health. So if you're not already familiar with, we understand that we all have a brain, right? It exists right up here. But interestingly enough, the gut microbiome has been known and referred to as the second brain. So we're really trying to figure out what is controlling what. Is the brain controlling our gut activity, or is potentially the gut actually having more of an impact on our brain and the signals and pathways that exist and the different messages that are sent in between? So what we find is that it's actually interconnected. They interact together with one another. So the gut microbiome literally is made up of trillions upon trillions of cells, and they consist of healthy microbes, bacteria, yeast, and other different microorganisms, and they all play specific roles in our overall health. The gut microbiome has different functionalities that are very, very specific. In particular, we understand that the gut microbiome is very, very important in terms of our overall digestion. So it helps us metabolize food correctly. It's significant in terms of how we absorb our nutrients as well. And this is very, very important because we know with scleroderma, some of the effects that it has on the gastrointestinal tract can certainly have an impact on malabsorption of nutrients. So we want to treat our gut microbiome the best we possibly can. In addition to that, it has a huge impact on our hormonal balance. For instance, we eat food. When we eat certain foods, our glucose levels rise. In order to offset the glucose and get us back into a homeostatic environment, basically get back into equilibrium, our body's going to secrete another hormone called insulin. So there is a regulatory system that occurs to ensure that we keep our levels normalized. That's something that the gut microbiome has a huge impact on. It also has a huge impact on our ability to feel hungry. It also impacts our ability to feel satiated and full. All of these things are derived from the different microorganisms that exist in our microbiome. It's also responsible for producing and making different types of vitamins. Vitamin K in particular, which is a blood clotting nutrient, is very, very important to our overall health. This is something that's produced in our body. In addition to that, there's certain B vitamins. They're called water soluble vitamins that are very, very important for different metabolic pathways and different functionalities in our system. The microbiome is also extremely important for our immune system. It helps us stay away from pathogens and different types of harmful bacteria that can certainly have a huge impact on our health. If we all remember during the crux of COVID, everything that was talked about, everything that was suggested was really based on a specific nutrient. We understand the importance of making sure that we have good hygiene, and we are really trying to prevent any type of bacterial translocation in tumors of our body. So everything we heard about was centered around washing your hands, make sure you're sanitizing everything, and that's all very, very important. Vitamin D was something that was highly discussed during COVID because vitamin D has such a huge impact on our immune system. But so will all of these different microorganisms that exist in our gut microbiome, they also impact our ability to ward off harmful different types of invaders, bacteria, and other microorganisms that can negatively impact our health. Importantly, when it comes specifically to our gut health, is that there's a specific intestinal barrier that occurs in our cells of our gut microbiome. And the bacteria are responsible for protecting our gut. It protects us from not allowing different types of inflammatory types of markers, as well as other different harmful pathogens to come in to our gut and negatively impact our health. You may have been familiar with something called leaky gut syndrome. You might be familiar with something else called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which is basically an acronym standing for SIBO. All of these things are impacted by the intestinal barrier. So the gut microbiome helps provide a shield. It basically helps us protect our bacteria that helps us thrive. It helps us digest the food. It helps us with our immune system. So the gut microbiome is something that we really, really want to make sure that we are holding true to ourselves and we are protecting the best we possibly can. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we also understand that when you look at the effects of scleroderma, it has a huge, huge impact on our microbiome. One of the things that happens is that it causes this dysregulation, this irregularity in terms of our immune system, and it impacts the gut bacteria. So what happens is it can create something called dysbiosis. Dysbiosis is an imbalance of bacteria where more of the bad gut microbes, microorganisms, yeast, bacteria basically infect our microbiome. And what that does is it takes away a lot of the good gut bacteria that helps us, that makes us feel good, that gives us energy, that improves a lot of different elements of hormonal balance as well. So when you look at the different types of side effects gastrointestinally that's associated with scleroderma, we want to make sure that we're promoting good, healthy gut bacteria because that can really help us manage some of those symptoms that are associated with the disease process itself, as well as, again, some of the side effects that might be associated with the medications that we take as well. A lot of you that might be suffering through some of these gastrointestinal side effects understand that every day something else might be different. You might one day have some level of diarrhea. The next day you're constipated. You might have some abdominal discomfort. You're very, very bloated. And it has a huge, huge impact on our overall health because it impacts your appetite. It impacts your ability and desire to want to eat something. So that has deleterious effects on our health. And we understand with this irregularity that exists with the gut bacteria and the impact that scleroderma has, it can also have a huge impact on the response, on kind of the activity that exists with autoimmune diseases such as scleroderma. So it can actually worsen some of these symptoms and it can certainly exacerbate these conditions as well. So when we have some of these negative impacts that exist with a poor gut microbiome, it's certainly going to have a huge impact on our ability to digest food. It impacts our ability to absorb the nutrients, and that can lead to malnutrition. And so the goal is to really create awareness on different ways and things that we can do to promote good, healthy gut bacteria and really try to eliminate some of the bad bacteria that exist. Next slide, please. There's a lot of things and there's different effects that can occur that impact the gut microbiome. Stress, anxiety, depression, our mental health, all of these things can actually impact our gut microbiome. Because if you recall what I mentioned is that there's a interconnected axis between the gut and the brain, and they interact with each other all the time. So depending upon how our gut microbiome is looking, it could actually impact our mental health. It can impact our ability to make choices and decisions that are more beneficial for ourselves. So when you look at diet and you look at nutritional impact of it, literally more than half of the gut bacteria that exist is impacted by your diet. Stress, anxiety, all these other factors, they certainly can impact our gut microbiome as well. But the diet really has probably more of the most controllable and preventable ways to help us. So we know that the bacteria that exist is impacted by our diet and the nutritional value that exists in the foods that we consume. So all of that has a huge impact on something called the diversification and balance of bacteria that exists in our gut. And that's really important because there are trillions upon trillions of cells. So we want to have a balance and we want to have a microbial diversity because that's what's going to give us the best opportunity to ward off diseases, promote our health, and really try to manage some of these gastrointestinal side effects. So one of the most important components of food that we really want to try to focus our consumption is dietary fiber. Dietary fiber is only found in plants. It does not exist in animals. You will not find fiber in eggs. You won't find it in cheese. It doesn't exist in fish or chicken or beef. It's only found in plants. It's a structural component that is very, very important to that living organism. But dietary fiber is also extremely important to human health as well. In particular, it has the biggest impact on our gut health, the microbiome, and the microbial diversity that exists. So essentially, the more dietary fiber-rich foods that we consume, that can certainly have an impact on increasing the good gut buddies as well as decreasing the bad stuff that is negatively impacting our health. Please, next slide. All right, so we talk about diet, nutrition. Fiber, again, one of the most important things that you can pay attention to. So the things that are really going to promote the good eubacteria, which is the good bacteria in our gut, preventing disease, reducing some of these symptoms, managing some of the side effects that are occurring, are based on food sources. Vegetables in particular are very, very important for our good gut buddies. Why? Because they have some of the highest concentrations of dietary fiber. Now, there's a number of different types of fiber sources that exist. There's something called soluble fiber, and there's something called insoluble fiber. Both of these fiber sources have very, very important impacts and aspects to our health, but they have specific functionalities. Soluble fiber is more beneficial to cardiovascular health and blood sugar regulation. So when you look at things such as soluble fiber rich foods, they form a gel in our gut. And what this gel does is it blunts any type of blood sugar increase or response based on the food that you might be consuming. So essentially, it slows down the absorption of the sugars in our bloodstream, further regulating and getting us back to a homeostatic environment and basically creating a better gut brain axis. Insoluble fiber is probably something that's more important for the purposes of this conversation. Insoluble fiber is more impactful for gastrointestinal health. It prevents constipation. It reduces the risk of diverticular conditions and colorectal cancers. It keeps us more regular. It basically helps us so that we can eliminate a lot easier and not put as much pressure on our gut. So insoluble fiber rich foods are coming from things like non-starchy vegetables. You ever heard of something called roughage? Roughage is things like green leafy vegetables, spinach, kale, arugula, romaine lettuce, endive, mesclun, all these different types of green leafy vegetables. And the darker the green leafy vegetable, the more nutritional components that are more beneficial to our health. Now, all of these fiber-rich sources are very important for us to consume, but we really want to try to focus our attention on consuming more whole foods that are less processed. Processing provides a lot of manufacturers the opportunity to create very flavorful foods, but a lot of the components that exist in processed foods negatively impact our gut bacteria. There are certain things that they put in there that certainly have an impact on increasing metabolic dysregulation. It worsens our blood sugars, it impacts our cholesterol levels, but more importantly, it promotes inflammation in the body. And the more pro-inflammatory responses that we have from the food we consume, it's going to make it a lot more challenging to manage some of the side effects or the symptoms associated gastrointestinally with scleroderma. So vegetables are very, very important foods to consume. Fruits are also very, very important because they are another great source of dietary fiber. In addition to that, whole grains, things like brown rice, whole wheat pastas, quinoa, farro, millets, bulgur, buckwheat. These are all whole grains. They promote healthy bacteria because, again, they're a great source of dietary fiber. One of the most important food components you can consume are legumes. They are a food group that consists of things like beans, lentils, peas, edamame. These food sources really support our gut health. And one of the biggest reasons that they do this is that when we consume fiber-rich foods, fiber in itself is indigestible, but the bacteria in our gut have the ability to break down and degrade the dietary fiber. And that's really important because what happens is there are specific components of chemical reactions that it leads to something that our bacteria feed off of. So it's basically our fuel. And the bacteria that exist in our gut are living, breathing organisms. So we need to feed it the right fuel. Dietary fiber is the best fuel for our gut microbes. Believe it or not, for chocolate lovers, dark chocolate actually promotes healthy bacteria. The higher the percentage of the cocoa, the less sugar, the more what we call polyphenol compounds, which again supports good gut health. Green tea, for those that might go to particular Asian restaurants, For those that enjoy tea, green tea is some of the best because they contain antioxidants. Reducing oxidative stress reduces inflammation in the body. Inflammation systemically is one of the biggest drivers of disease. So some of these food sources are anti-inflammatory. So they help reduce the inflammation in the body. And what that does is that improves our gut microbial diversity. It impacts our ability to reduce some of the symptoms that are associated with the disease. And it overall helps us feel better and have more energy each and every day. You might be familiar with things called prebiotics or probiotics. I'm going to discuss a little bit more of these in the next slide, but these are also particular organisms that really support good gut bacteria. Now, on the other hand, there are specific foods that we might be consuming more kind of established as part of the standard American dietary approach that is leading to a lot of the different types of diseases that afflict us every single day in our society. Heart disease, diabetes, cancer, high blood pressure, as well as autoimmune conditions such as scleroderma. And there are specific food sources that contribute to this dysbiosis, this imbalance of bacteria where it promotes more of the bad stuff. And it basically rids your body of the good gut bacteria. So, what are some of the things that can impact this negatively? Saturated fat rich foods. So, these generally speaking are coming from animal based sources. A lot of red meat consumption, steaks, hamburgers, lamb, pork, consuming a lot of processed meats like bologna and salami and prosciutto, and all those different types of luncheon meats. They are very high in saturated fat. And saturated fat promotes more inflammation in the body. And that does not feed the good gut bacteria. And that again creates an imbalance. And so that is something that we really want to try to start minimizing in our dietary approaches. Ultra processed type of snacks that we love in our society, things like potato chips and pretzels and all the different types of things that we see in the middle aisle of grocery stores. A lot of these particular foods that are loaded in sodium, they are very high in fat, but specifically saturated fats. Fried foods, cheeses, in fact, are very high in saturated fat. So if we can just start the process of improving some of our dietary patterns and reducing the amount of these ultra processed foods, these saturated fat rich foods, we're overall going to do a lot better with our overall health and in particular, helping us every single day fuel our body, feel a little bit better each and every day, be able to digest and tolerate the food that we consume as well, because again, it gives us the ability to improve our immune response and to digest these foods and absorb the nutrients in much, much improved fashions. Refined flours. So a lot of us might eat things like pastas and rices and breads and cereals, and we usually don't think twice about it necessarily. But the goal is to really reduce what we call refined carbohydrates. Refined carbohydrates are these particular foods that I just mentioned, where manufacturers have literally eliminated a lot of the nutritional value. The vitamins and minerals have been removed. The dietary fiber has been eliminated. The water content, so our ability to feel satiated, is also impacted. And it's really important to have the lubrication to our cells so it can impact that intestinal barrier so we don't have a lot of the bad bacteria penetrate into our gut. So the goal again is to really reduce our intake of these refined carbohydrates and choose more whole grain, whole wheat products, and some of the other whole grains that I mentioned as well. And alcohol should definitely be eliminated as much as you possibly can, if not limited as much as you can as well. Because alcohol has so many deleterious effects on our health, in particular our gut health. It certainly affects our sleep patterns. It affects our liver health. It has a huge impact on our brain health and our cardiovascular system too. So let's just try to focus our attention more on eating whole foods that we can literally pick from a garden. Let's try to simplify things based on literally what either our parents or grandparents used to consume. There's a lot more of these highly processed foods that exist in our society, but these are the things that are really negatively impacting our health. Please, next slide. All right, so this now gets into this whole concept of prebiotics and probiotics. And both of these particular types of compounds actually have a lot of health benefits to our host in our gut microbiome. But they are not the same thing. Prebiotics are actually what the bacteria in our guts feed off of. It's their fuel. They are these group of selectively fermentable nutrients and fibers in our gastrointestinal microbiota. And what they do is they result in different compositional changes that primarily, basically, again, are the bacteria's food. So there are specific food sources that actually contribute more prebiotics. And these are the particular foods that are encouraged to try to adopt in our dietary pattern a little bit more frequently. So in terms of fruits, apples, prunes, plums, bananas, believe it or not, tomatoes, these are really, really good sources of prebiotic fibers. Different whole grains, as I mentioned, oats, barley. These particular things are very, very good fermentable fibers. So again, this is what the gut bacteria feed off of. It's their fuel, it's their energy source. And so these prebiotic fibers are going to help us thrive and flourish. When you look at berries, berries have these blue purplish color pigments. All different types of fruits and vegetables have different colors. There are reasons for these things. They all contain different types of pigments that are associated with different health benefits. So it's important to have a diversity and balance of all these different types of fruits and vegetables so that we can give our gut bacteria this microbial diversity, to give this all these different types of strains that impact our health in a very, very positive way. Now, turn to the next slide, please. So the next slide is going to show you probiotics. And this is something that's very, very much part of our society nowadays. The media drives it. Physicians might talk to you about it. You might hear or read about it a lot. So probiotics are actually food sources that contain living microorganisms. And these microorganisms actually, when they're consumed in appropriate quantities, can have health benefits. They really can. So probiotics are something that can interact with our gut bacteria, and that can has a huge impact on our immune regulation. So that can start giving us the opportunity to ward off things like viruses and bacteria and really promote our health. So these things are found in local grocery stores, and these are encouraged for you to literally put in to your eating pattern. Additionally, to also consuming some of these other prebiotic fiber-rich food sources. So if you're able to tolerate dairy-based foods, and everybody is different, this has to be a personalized approach because different foods impact different people in different ways. But if you're able to tolerate things like dairy-based foods, yogurt, it's encouraged to choose the lower fat versions and the ones that don't contain the sugars and sweeteners in them. So if you can choose a plain fat-free or low-fat version, that is ultimately the right type of yogurt that you want to put into your system. And you want to make sure that they contain live and active cultures because those live and active cultures are living, breathing organisms. And again, they interact with the bacteria that already exist in your gut. Kefir. Kefir is actually called cultured milk. Cultured milk is something you could find at any local grocery store. Again, a plain, low fat to fat free version, live and active cultures. Kombucha. That's a fermented tea. Now, when you go to your local grocery store, this is a very trendy, popular topic, kombucha. There are 20 different manufacturers that exist in kombucha. But it's really important to understand that manufacturers are in the business of making money. So a lot of times what they do is they add sugars and sweeteners to it so that you enjoy it more. But the problem is that the benefits that you get from these probiotic strains in these kombucha teas could be outweighed by a lot of the refined sugars that exist as well. So if you choose a kombucha, you want to make sure that it provides things like chlorella or spirulina, which are these blue-green algae groups that really promote good, healthy gut bacteria. Soy-based foods, Japanese cuisine in particular, they have blue zone population groups. They have some of the highest longevity and some of the best qualities of life. And the idea behind them is they consume a lot of soy-based foods, in particular, fermentable soy foods. One is something called natto. Natto is a fermentable soybean. It's a staple dish that a lot of Japanese utilize for breakfast meals, but it promotes a lot of immune regulation. It really helps ward off disease. Tempeh is a fermentable form of tofu. That is also something that is easily purchasable. And again, they contain a lot of these live active microorganisms that synergistically work with the prebiotic fibers in our gut already to create a relationship that really helps us, again, feel good, create more energy, and really manage some of the symptoms gastrointestinally that are associated with scleroderma in particular. Let's turn to the next page, please. There's a lot of things that can impact someone that has scleroderma that you're all likely to be very familiar with. So it's really important to take these things in consideration and figure out ways that we can kind of help modulate some of these effects. Well, if someone is feeling very bloated and gassy and has a lot of abdominal discomfort, you're likely not going to want to eat very frequently. Your appetite's going to be impacted. Your ability to digest the food because of esophageal or gastrointestinal dysmotility is certainly going to play a role in your ability to nourish yourself. So it's really important to try to develop a dietary pattern that you can consume some of these foods in simple, easy, readily accessible ways to still give you the nutrient composition that your body requires, but also to make sure that you're getting enough protein in your diet as well. Because it's really important to make sure that you maintain lean body tissue. As we get older, and in particular, if we are not nourishing our bodies and we're losing weight, such as some of the potential types of effects that a lot of scleroderma patients deal with, then what happens is our body goes to protein for energy and fuel. And that protein comes from our muscle mass. And when we start losing muscle, it can impact our bone health. It can impact our cardiovascular health. It can impact our immune system as well. So it's really important to develop habits so that we can increase our protein intake. And I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes just a couple of strategies and tips to really try to help you in those given situations. Caloric intake, again, is also very important because there are forms of malnutrition that can occur if we don't consume enough calories. And that obviously can have a huge, huge impact on us being undernourished and not giving ourselves the right types of nutrient intake to keep ourselves basically moving in the right direction and feeling well. Hydration is a big issue. A lot of scleroderma individuals, they get dehydrated very easily. Number one, just because of the way that you might be feeling in any given day, and you don't want to put anything into your mouth. But the other reason is that some of the medications that you take, some of the side effects that are associated with them, they don't give you the feeling necessarily of thirst. So you can get potentially very, very dry mouth. And you don't get that desire that you feel like you need something to drink. but dehydration can have a lot of negative impacts on our health. And so hydrating is one of the biggest keys, again, to support overall gut bacteria, to, to create that barrier of the intestines so you don't have any of that leaky gut. And you really try to reduce any small intestinal bacterial overgrowth as well, but also lubricating our cells too, so they can function the way that they need to. Constipation. We talk about how some of the medications you might take could lead to side effects leading to constipation, as well as just a disease process because of the dysmotility, and food is just not moving the direction and the rate that it needs to so that you can eliminate it. So fiber-rich food sources, water-rich food sources, hydrating your body as much as you can, all of that is very important to try to reduce constipation. In addition to that, I would be remiss if I did not talk about the importance of physical activity. Exercise. Number one, the impact that it has physically on our health, but it also has an impact on our mental health. There are specific neurotransmitters. There are dopamine sensors. There's serotonin, and they literally give us the ability to feel better and change our mood just by moving our body a little bit more. This is the interaction that occurs with the gut-brain axis, and exercise and physical activity can also have an impact on the microbial diversity that exists. So having physical activity on a daily basis, if you can, or as much as you possibly can, in combination with trying to adopt an eating plan where you're incorporating a little bit more whole food, fiber-rich food sources, this is going to give you an opportunity to feel a little bit better. You're going to digest the food better. The food will help you go through the system a little bit quicker as well. A lot of scleroderma individuals, they might suffer through reflux disease, gastroesophageal reflux. And so the food doesn't go down, it can get stuck, or it can cause these reflux systems where you have a lot of indigestion. Now, everybody is affected differently again, but there are specific trigger foods that can certainly have more of an impact. Coffee drinkers, caffeine in particular, can exacerbate acid reflux. Alcohol consumption, that can also have an impact on increasing those symptoms. If you eat a lot of acidic foods, tomato or tomato-based products, citrus type of foods, they can also potentially impact it as well. So if somebody is having some of those impacts, there are other food sources that you want to try to incorporate that don't give you those symptoms or those particular types of effects. Sometimes people, they're impacted by swallowing difficulties. So that's medical term is called dysphagia. And there's ways and there are specific types of important practices that you can take to really help try to mitigate some of those effects. And I want to talk about that in the next slide. Please change. Okay. So the importance of trying to feel well every single day is a huge challenge for a lot of folks that suffer through scleroderma. And the idea and the goal again is to try to manage some of these symptoms. So having a balanced diet and a variety of different types of food groups can give you a lot of the nutrients. It can give you the opportunity of having more fiber-rich foods to promote the good gut bacteria. Consuming a lot of vegetables and fruits and whole grains and carbohydrate sources that you can pick from a garden, as well as incorporating things like nuts and seeds and healthy fats. That drives gut microbial diversity. That promotes reducing inflammation from the body. And that again can help manage some of those symptoms. So some of the things that I really try to encourage people to adopt to try to help give you that balance of nutrition, especially if there's days where you find it very, very difficult to eat, is to try to make this as simplistic for you as possible. There's things that you could do where you can help the food go through your system a little bit easier. I encourage people sometimes to have things in a consistency, like a pureed consistency, like a consistency that goes through a blenderized composition to where you can consume it a little bit quicker. And this way it can go through your system a little bit easier. So things that are more liquefied, things that are more pureed, that can help at least reduce some of the issues that occurs with dysmotility, as well as delayed gastric emptying, which basically means and refers to when the food sits in your stomach over a longer period of time, that promotes bacterial overgrowth. So if we can consume these foods a little bit easier in these methodologies, it can help the food travel through your gastrointestinal system a little bit better. It can help try to ward off some of these effects that are associated with it. So I recommend things sometimes like protein shakes, smoothies. But what I recommend is utilizing whole foods. So getting your protein sources from things like plants that also have fiber, polyphenol compounds that are anti-inflammatory, as well as, again, protein, micronutrients like vitamins and minerals, and antioxidants. So putting things like a clean peanut butter or almond butter, adding things like flaxseed and chia seed, which are great sources of protein, dietary fiber, insoluble fiber in particular, which is really, again, important to your gastrointestinal health. Adding good protein sources that are very, very simple, like doing an unsweetened soy milk. Or again, if you can tolerate dairy, even a skim milk, again, lower fat food products. You want to try to reduce your overall fat intake from unhealthy sources, again, because they promote bad bacteria, but because it also slows down the digestive process. So that can contribute to more of the delayed gastric emptying, and it can worsen some of the effects that you're feeling from day to day. It might be a little bit easier as well. Instead of having 2 to 3 larger volume meals, to try to reduce the volume of what you're eating, but trying to do it in a way where you're almost kind of grazing throughout the day. So you're doing more small, frequent meals. This this one in particular puts a lot less stress on being able to mobilize the food throughout your gastrointestinal system. So that can be helpful in nourishing your body with the right types of nutrients, getting the right types of macronutrients from your body, and again, trying to ward off and manage some of those gastrointestinal side effects. We know that calcium, we know that vitamin D play a very, very important impact on our overall health, specifically immune health. It certainly impacts our bone health as well. And it's really, really important to ensure that we're reducing our risk of fractures and falls. And we know that if we're not consuming the right types of foods and we're not able to have appetites on given days, and just based on how we're feeling, it's very difficult sometimes, that can impact our nourishment. So sometimes we're not getting the adequate amounts of nutrients our body requires. Vitamin D is something that the sun primarily is something that helps us produce more vitamin D. Vitamin D cannot be adequately provided through the foods we consume. There are certain foods that give more vitamin D than others, specifically dairy-based foods. There's also foods that are fortified. There are things like milk, yogurts, cottage cheese. Those are all mushrooms, fish, and seafood. They have vitamin D because the sun penetrates. But if we get a little bit of sun and maybe we move our bodies a little bit so we kind of get that synergistic relationship, that can give us a little bit more vitamin D to help us support our bone health. Calcium is something that is promoted through food. Mostly it's encouraged to get from the green leafy vegetables, which again helps promote your good gut bacteria as well. So things like broccoli, things like spinach, They are all calcium-rich food sources. So you're encouraged to consume those things to protect your bones, as well as our brain. Our brain health is very, very important. So it's important as we age to protect our memory, our focus. There are certain anti-inflammatory properties that exist from food sources that we consume. Fatty acids called omega 3s are ubiquitously found in sources like fish, flaxseed, avocados, walnuts, olive oil. So, from a healthy fat standpoint, you're encouraged to eat these things or try to incorporate more of these foods on a daily basis because this supports brain health. And again, when you look at the gut microbiome, you have this interaction and this interconnected communication between the brain and the gut. It's impacting chemical reactions, it's impacting your mental health, it's also having an impact on your physical health as well, hormonal balance, and your immune health as well. So I think it's important that creating awareness of different types of foods that we can incorporate a little bit more of to help us feel a little bit better each and every day, try to reduce our intake, and from a stepwise approach. This is not something where you're automatically going to change your eating habits in one given day. You want this to be a progressive approach. The goal is to create longer term habits. But even making small changes goes a long way. Even just incorporating one more serving of vegetables in a given day is already promoting better, good, healthy bacteria. If you introduce one more serving of fruit per day, you're going to get more antioxidants. You're going to reduce inflammation in the body. If you can choose maybe a whole grain as opposed to something that's refined. So let's say you choose like a whole wheat pasta versus a regular white pasta. That confers significantly more health benefits. That's already making improvements. So try to look at it more from that perspective as opposed to this overarching, I need to consume all these foods, because the reality is that it's not realistic. And number two, it's important to work from a slow and steady approach because everybody is different the way that food impacts them. So it's important to see once you introduce these foods, how are you personally being impacted? How is it affecting your overall health? How are you feeling each and every day? Next slide, please. We all have a different story. We all come from different backgrounds. We've all been affected by this dreadful disease in many different fashions and ways. I do not have scleroderma, but as I mentioned, someone that is very, very important in my life has been dealing with for very many, many years. But this also goes into a lot of different types of things that occur in people's lives. I have my own story that I just wanted to provide and share with you that I think is very important for people to hear because people are impacted by diet, people are impacted by genetics, but what we do on a daily basis matters. And when I was a very, very young age, I had a lot of stomach issues. And it was all kind of chalked up to this is your genetic background. Your grandparents, your great grandparents, everybody had stomach issues. And I did come from a background where I had a foundational principle of balanced type of meals. And that was wonderful. But once I got a little bit older and I made more choices, I didn't have the best eating habits. And what it did was it made me feel worse and worse until it got to a point where literally in my early 20s, I had to have a colonoscopy because I had very, very difficult times with constipation. I had bloody types of ways of eliminating from my body. I did not feel good every single day. And I thought what I was doing was okay. I thought it was somewhat healthy, but it wasn't really until I started to learn a little bit more about this and I started to incorporate a little bit more of the foods that we've discussed today that I literally changed my life. I changed how I feel every single day. I started to incorporate more of these fiber rich food sources. It was a slow and steady process. But I got to the point where I never needed medication again. I felt good every single day. And I'm not saying this is something that you're going to feel every day, but if you just make some small changes, you might find yourself having a little bit less of some of these effects. And so I just wanted you to kind of hear a little bit of that story. Um, I wanted to provide a little bit of encouragement for you as well to know that you're not alone. There's a support system that exists. There's a lot of science. There's a lot of research that's going on specifically with the gut microbiome. There's ways that people can consume things that target strains in the gut, but it's still a very novel principle, and we're still learning more and more about it. But what we do know is that